It's still out there. I can see it moving in the darkness of the hallway beyond the door. Glimpses of its bulk captured through the rusted keyhole. I raise my trembling hand to check my watch. The hands lay idle, the battery run dead. The immobile date counter confirms my thoughts. It's been at least 3 days since I trapped myself in this room. With my watch, my only companion, dead. I can only guess at how long this ordeal has tormented me. Slumping to the ground, I slide my back down the rough and pitted surface of the old iron door. From my dejected new position, I surveyed my surroundings, as if hoping they would change since I found myself trapped here. The room is a dismal concrete cube, walls covered in faded and chipped paint nearly the same shade as the cement that lay beneath. In one corner, there is a shelf of iron frames like one that you might find in any utility closet. It stands empty, shelves rusted and choked with dust. In another corner is a heavy desk of metal and particle board, made for practicality over looks. The desk drawers are empty, but my coat and some oily old rags are laid over the top, the writing surface in some attempt at making a bed. Under the desk is my ragged backpack, empty and surrounded by the empty tins of the last of my food. There's nothing else here, no way out of this dingy old room that acts as my prison. No way out except the door at my back. The door, it waits beyond. I shudder as much from the chill breeze seeping from under the door as the thought of the thing that lurks and coils in the darkened hall just outside. This room is a dead end. Not even a safety window or ventilation grate providing any hope of escape. Why hasn't that thing outside come in here? Why hasn't it taken me for whatever horrid fate it has in store for me? What is it waiting for? The door to the room has no lock, no deadbolt. It barely even latches. The thing in the hall could burst in here with no trouble at all, and yet it seems content to wait just outside. A deep and rasping hiss, just barely audible, floats into the room from the hallway.
You had a choice.
I ignore it. It has whispered such things to me intermittently throughout my ordeal. Nonchalant and matter-of-fact statements in a gargling and wretched voice. I stand and begin to pace from corner to corner, keeping to the tracks I have kicked into the dust and grime on the floor and the countless laps I have taken across the room since I arrived. I think of how I arrived in this hell, how I came to be the prey of whatever patient horror waits outside. I remember walking abandoned streets and alleys, among the dust and the ash that settled there. I remember crushing silence and contemplation as I wandered alone. The world was quieter than it used to be, people content to isolate themselves. Championship was rare and invited dark ideas. No one knew where people disappeared to, only that one by one they had gone away and never returned until the streets were empty and the cities were quiet. No one knew except those who had gone away, been taken, and now me. The thing had appeared to me in the early hours of the morning, just before the sun began to rise in the dirty gray sky. It stalked from an alleyway mere yards from my camp, slithering from the darkness. I had turned and ran, pursued by the creature. I did not know why it came for me, not until now. I ran for hours, shaking from terror and exhaustion. Never once did the thing seem to tire or slow, maintaining pace behind me as I wove evasion trails through the streets and buildings. Whenever I tried to hide, it rooted me out, herding me towards doors and windows as if to prolong the chase. Only once I had trapped myself in this dead end had it stopped its pursuit, patiently waiting beyond the doorway.
You made your decision.
I froze in my tracks when I heard it speak again. It was getting harder to ignore, its whispering gnawing at something in the back of my skull. I pressed my fist to my eyes to alleviate the pressure in my head, muttering useless protests under my breath, my stomach growling, my bowels knotted from hunger and cold dread. Finally overtaken with exhaustion, I crumpled to the floor and the world slipped away. I awoke unknowable hours later, throat dry and stomach empty, shaken back to the waking world by the sound of wet slithering. As I lay on the cold and grimy stone floor, a shadow darkened a large crack under the door, and I caught a fleeting glimpse of pale worm flesh as the thing passed by closure to the threshold. The cloying scent of meat and sweat wafted into the room.
You didn't have to do what you did.
Fresh tears sprang to my eyes as my headache returned, intensified. I worried the thing outside was right. I didn't have to do it. I made my choices. My fault. I shook the thoughts from my head, bringing forth a fresh pang of soreness into my skull. Slowly trembling, I stood and approached the door, stooping on aching joints back down to the keyhole. I could just barely see it, out there in the gloom of the filthy hallway. It lay wriggling and twisting upon itself, vast coils of sickly skin over pulsing black veins and oozing with dripping, watery mucus. Bile rose in my throat. The long tube of its body, wider across than a manhole cover, filled the hall with its wretched mass. The thing lifted its head and stared directly into the tiny hole I stared through, ropes and bubbling saliva splattering to the floor with the movement. I had never watched it while I spoke before. The rubbery flesh peeled and rolled back in furling masses, forming a ring of skin as it opened its mouth. Through the pall I could see within the dark and glistening tube of its body. I could not be certain, but the whole thing seemed to be hollow, a tunnel of undulating pale meat. Every inch of its empty innards was studded with flat, blunt teeth. Surely to be swallowed by the thing was to ensure a slow and claustrophobic death by grinding erosion. From somewhere in the oozing depths of its body, a smaller mouth emerged, distending on elastic gums and tendons from some distant part of its eternal anatomy. This smaller mouth looked almost human, conjuring memories of apes curling back their lips to reveal bare teeth and angry red flesh. Its clenched teeth parted, revealing a black and worm-like tongue, and a wretched voice issued forth. Its gurgling whispers filled my ears once again.
She couldn't stop you. She was vulnerable. Defenseless.
The pressure in my skull grew in agonizing intensity. Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! The smaller humanoid mouth retracted into the depths of the thing as the ring of skin unfurled to close the nightmare maw once again. The huge slithering bulk remained writhing in place beyond the door as I took a shaky step back, gagging. She was defenseless. I had made my choice. I was strong. She was weak. People were so hard to find, so isolated, so lonely. People go missing. Lots of people gone, then the rest hiding and staying alone. Being alone kept them safe. If they were alone, they couldn't have dark thoughts, do dark things. I found someone, had dark thoughts, did a dark thing. My mind burned with needless a pain which burned with every erratic heartbeat. Why had I done it? I vomited messily upon the cold and filthy concrete floor, the stinking and watery vestige of the last of my food pooling under my feet, the weight of my guilt clutching at my guts, squeezing pain of realization.
She cried.
It hissed. The memory clawed itself into my consciousness, the sound of her begging and sobbing. She had cried and I had not cared. I turned and stared at the bare, rusted metal of the door. The thing waiting outside knew my sins, and it had come for me, just as it had come for everyone else. Everyone weighed down by what they had done. This was to be the end of us, a race doomed to be eradicated by their own wrongdoings. The thing beyond the doorway, an emissary of some greater power that judged us for our sins and found us wanting. One by one, humanity would be judged. My body trembled as I stared at the door. It had hurted me where I couldn't run, where I had to face my sins, understand my guilt, understand why this was my fate. I sobbed quietly there in the dark. I brought this upon myself. We all did. I lay on the cold, wet ground for hours, whimpering and shaking with terror, and racked with the agony of guilty conscience. I could hear it slithering outside, forever patient. The last of my tears expanded. I rose to my weak feet, with my breaths coming in choked gasps. I stepped to the door and placed my trembling hand on the latch. I had a choice. She was vulnerable. I chose to hurt her. My fault. All my fault. The thing beyond the door would need to wait no longer.